Um, I'm excited to share this with you all, one of my favorite artists. And let's talk about what I want to do at the end. This is the question at the end that I want you thinking about. Which work has the most spiritual or religious meaning for you, and why? I mean, not necessarily your favorite. It could be your favorite. And I want to hear from you all. So be thinking about this one. Which of these works of art touches your faith or your devotion or whatever? And I'd love to hear your reaction, because that is some of why Michelangelo created these works. He is very clear that he wants to inspire people's faith. He wasn't just creating works for their beauty, although they are beautiful. That was part of who he was. So be thinking about that, of which of these. All right, so here he is, Michelangelo. I've heard it pronounced different ways. You see his years, right? So we'll talk about even what's going on in the early 1500s. You see him there. One of the things you notice is he has the broken nose, right? And that, you'll see it in some of these self-portraits. And apparently, as he was a teenager, he got into a fight, and a guy punched him in the nose and broke his nose. And so he felt like he was kind of a homely man, but he created these great works of art. His mother died when he was 6, and that clearly influenced him. The loss of his mother, and so the mother figures that he wants to portray. He then kind of was the nanny situation was, he was with a woman whose husband was a stonemason. So right away he was involved in the heavy work of making sculptures and stonework. He knew that from his very earliest days. He was drawn to art. He was drawn to stone from early time. So I want to show you, these I'm going to have 7 works that we're going to look at. So be thinking, which of these 7 are you going to drawn to? And as you see, almost 60 years of he had a long career. And what does that mean? Different things that he's trying to present over all his different time. Okay, so here's the first one. And I'm not doing this one because it's such a great work of art, but that he created this when he was 15. It's called Madonna of the Stairs. I think what I was doing when I was 15, right? You can already see kind of that heavy sculpture feel to what he's trying to create. It's a Madonna and child, so again, you think of him having lost his mother, right? So there's a kind of a caressing of a child. The scholars aren't exactly clear. Is Mary nursing the child, or is Mary protecting the child? Isn't really clear. And even what these children on the upper left are doing there, are they dancing? Are they wrestling? Again, we don't know. It was so early on, but you get a feel for his style already early, and also religious work, right? That was of the time, but something you could see he wanted to create from these early days. Okay, so 15-year-old trying to make his way, trying to, get a reputation, and really early on, he goes to Rome, and he's asked to create a pietà. So pietà, this is a word that means compassion or suffering. And so this is in the Vatican, right? If you've ever seen this, a beautiful work, Mary holding Jesus. Now you start to think about the meaning. So this is not a biblical scene, right? There is no scene where Mary is on the lap of Jesus, but a very common subject in that time. One of the things you can start to think about is lots of works of art of Mary holding the baby Jesus, right? As a child, and the kind of joy of having the child Jesus. So she knew about that. But here is Mary holding her dead son, right? What does that mean? Her suffering, she's cradling him, right? And kind of holding her arm out. We can even talk about her expression. What is this work trying to inspire in people? Now you'll see the kind of the pyramidal shape that's very Renaissance. Another thing, again, these are the scholars notice, if Mary actually stood up, she'd be over 7 feet tall. So her clothes kind of cover that. So he's not trying to create a completely realistic moment. She's able to carry him. Do you see the size of her? You feel that with her? And him, kind of drooping, holding that situation. Now, one of the things about her then, so she looks pretty young. And so there are a lot of questions about that. So if Jesus is 33, 50, she looks younger than that. So why is that? And in one place, Michelangelo says, I sculpted her in a memory of my mother. Another kind of place is it about Mary's sort of, eternal nature, her youthfulness. It's saying something spiritually about her. That she's obviously an important figure. And no, you can think about what is the expression she has there. It's not agony. She's holding her dead child. There's a kind of, I'd be interested, resignation, peacefulness. Is there a sense that she trusts in the resurrection? Is there a sense that she's suffering but God is with her? I don't know. I don't know if you'd call it peaceful, somber, reflective. I think he's trying, what is Michelangelo trying to tell us about this woman and this moment of what is being expressed? So you can kind of see it here. You see this sash? So it's got words on it. So the story goes that he'd finished the sculpture and he was standing around. Again, he was an unknown person. And somebody was looking at this and goes, oh, great, oh, I know who did that, and named a different sculptor. And he got envious. And so he came in that night and carved his name across the sash. And then the story goes that the next day he was ashamed. And he said, I'm never going to sign another work. This is not why I do this. Why was I so immature? But that says something about him, that the one work that he did, then he said, I will never do it again, which he didn't. So the Jesus is not gory. You've seen these, not pouring out of blood. He is, he is clearly dead, but that's not the point, is to kind of shock people. And you could also kind of get a sense of his genius with his stonework, right? I mean, it looks like fabric, and that's, marble. Here's Jesus. So this is his Jesus, right? Serene. Again, not with thorns, but has given himself, and there he's, it's the Good Friday moment. And that's the face that Mary's looking on. So just take in this pietà for a minute. The suffering with us, the Mary's agony, the hope for more even in the midst of pain, holding somebody dear who's going through the worst. Of Mary, what is Mary showing us in this moment of cradling her son? Okay, so he's 20 years old, 21 years old, right? Amazing, gifted person. Or here on this early, he's made a mark for himself. But he's from, he didn't say. So he's born near Florence, right? And his family kind of connected to Florence. So this is in Italy, right? But Florence in the Great Renaissance. So he's called back to Florence because there's a huge piece of marble that's been laying there, and a guy had tried to make a statue, and it kind of screwed it up. But it's a famous kind of piece of marble, and Michelangelo, I'll do it. I'll take that piece of marble that has been kind of ruined and cast aside. Oh, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. I want to give you a sense of the ambiance. This is a man named Savonarola. So he's a Dominican monk who came into Florence and was a fiery reformer, right? This is before Martin Luther. So this is the 1490s. And he started to criticize the clergy, the Pope. You guys are, abusing your money. You're being corrupt. The people are too caught up into vanity. Have you ever heard Bonfire of the Vanities? The Tom Wolfe book? Well, that's based on Savonarola took a bunch of books and women's makeup and made a big bonfire in Florence. We're not going to be tempted by these things, right? Michelangelo heard him preach. So there's a fiery kind of faith going on in the 1400s. Savonarola, unfortunately, he was a little too early because the Pope didn't like it, and so he was arrested and burned at the stake at the very place where he burned these other things. But you just to have that sense of faith has kind of been churning for people of how do we Catholics reform this church, and or how do we resist that? So anyway, that's going on. Okay, back to my story of the hunk of marble. There it is. That's what he did with it. So this is the David, the most famous sculpture in the world. I don't think there's any doubt about that. So let's go back to the story. It's in 1 Samuel 17. Goliath comes out. Goliath is the big, Philistine warrior, about 7 feet tall, whatever he was, taunting the Israel people. Send out somebody to fight me. Nobody wants to. He's too dangerous. David is the youngest of all the boys. He's a shepherd, but he kind of comes on the scene. He's bringing food to the soldiers. And David says, I'll fight him. Whoa, you're going to fight him, David? And they try to, in the story, Saul says, here, take all my armor. And he puts on the armor, and he says, I can't move. So he takes off the armor. Now, it doesn't say he's nude, but there is a sense that he doesn't have any armor that's in the story. And he says, I'm not going to use a sword or a spear. I'm going to use a sling. I'm used to using a sling against bears and lions, right? So that's the story. And you know the story. He slings it, hits Goliath in the forehead, falls dead. He goes, he doesn't have a sword, cuts his head off, right? God's with me. God is going to make this happen. Okay, so one of the interesting pieces is almost all the other David sculptures, you just heard the story, this is Donatello, are post-Goliath dying, right? Here's Goliath, here's his head, he's cut off, he's got the sword, he's already cut the head off, right? It's the victory of God and God's people. That's not what this picture is, right? This is David looking at Goliath. He hasn't done the sling yet. Now there's a moment that says a lot. Oh boy, I've got a huge challenge in front of me. How am I going to do this? God, are you with me? Now you can see even a Renaissance human beings ready to look at a challenge. Or even politically, Florence saying, okay, who's out there? What bully's out there? We're not afraid of you. So there's a political level, a spiritual level. I think there's a moment of tension. And I don't know if we can relate to that. Hey, when do you have a moment of like, okay, this big thing's coming and it's dangerous. I don't know how it's going to work, but I'm going to face it. Right? That's an interesting moment. That's a moment of tension, right? He's getting ready. So then his face, this was the plate. It was going to be placed in the square, right? They wanted everyone to see it. Obviously, it couldn't stay there. It did stay there for a while, but it couldn't. This is going to be a sign of Florence. We're not afraid. We're like David, ready to take on Goliath. Who's the Goliath who's going to come? Now when you get close to the face, now you kind of see the worry. You see the tension in the brows. I think you get closer to the face and you see, this is not going to be easy, right? Do people see worry there, concern, staring out at what he's got to do? Is God going to be with me here? Flared nostrils? I mean, this is where he was the genius. We know that he did, dissection of human bodies. That's how he knew some of the muscles and all that. But he's capturing, some of the veins are pulsing. He's ready for a fight, which is, part of the story. There's the sling. The sling is almost missing, right? It's not really even there. It's more about him nude facing the problem. And I do think there's something about the nudity. We have to face the nudity here for a minute. This is shocking in some ways. The male body in particular being nude in art. And Michelangelo said, God made these bodies, right? We are beautiful. We're made in God's image. Why are you trying to hide this nudity? It clearly is part of his expression is to have nudes, be the people that he wants to do. See kind of the pulse there. The hands are kind of bigger. Hands and head are sort of bigger because originally they may have thought it was going to be up high. But here he is ready. 14 feet high. Okay? Just take in the David for a minute of what, in different angles, you get a different feel. The challenges in front of any one of us, or as a community, as a city. What's the Goliath there that we're afraid of? Everyone's afraid of Goliath. David says, I'll do it. God's with me. I'm not afraid. But I'm ready. So take in the David. So you get the Pietà and the David, and he's 23 years old or something. Amazing already. He could stop and he'd be the greatest in my book, right? So, Sistine Chapel. So I don't know if you saw the movie Conclave or you know about the Conclave. This is the site where they elect the Pope, right? Are we catching that? The white smoke coming out of the chimney comes out of this building, okay? And so the Pope at the time, Julius II, said, this is the chapel in the Vatican, I want to have my ceiling painted. And apparently the story is that the Pope said, I want the 12 apostles. And Michelangelo said, I got something better. And it was his idea, his vision of what he wanted to do on the ceiling, right? Clearly the most famous ceiling in human history, right? The ceiling. So he gets up there, again, lots of, how he did it, and the fresco, and on his back. And one of the pieces also, apparently this is true, when he first heard this commission, he said, no, this is a trick. They're wanting me to fail because I'm a sculptor. I am not a painter. That's how he felt about himself. And they said, no, this is not a trick. We want you. I mean, imagine being a sculptor and saying, okay, here you're going to paint. So now, just a little about the ceiling itself. So there it is, over 300 figures, so overwhelming. And he wanted to do from Genesis, the Genesis story, okay? And lots of figures and prophets, and it's kind of just overwhelming and colorful and whatever. So let's just take a look a little bit. I don't know if you can see this. So and he started on this end, but from right to left, this is the altar. So God creating from Genesis creates light and darkness, creates the sun and stars, and then begins to create the water and the plants. In the actual building, right here, there's what's called a rood screen, which means a screen that the lay people couldn't get in this part. I don't know if that's symbolic or not, but this is the creation, right? Then the middle 3 sections, because it's 9 panels, this is about humanity, creating Adam, creating Eve, and then they're tempted and thrown out of the garden, right? So those make real sense about Genesis 1 and 2. To me, the odd one is the last 3 panels are Noah. I don't know why I picked Noah. Noah and a sacrifice and the flood, and Noah is drunk. And it may be a continuation of temptation or, how humanity has misbehaved. He's trying to tell a salvation story, but that's what he wanted to do. And then you can see all the different other characters around. So let's take a look at a couple of these panels. So this is God. This is creating the sun, moon, and plants. Now, whether we say this is a gift that he gave us or a curse, unfortunately, a lot of people still imagine this is what God looks like, right? An old man with a beard. And we're trying in our Sunday school to not be locked in when we have them draw God, because that is kind of in the cartoon version, that's what God looks like. So, Michelangelo, why'd you do that? But this is the classic version, right? I don't know how many of you would think that. That's what God looks like. No, it's symbolic, but you can see a kind of wisdom and power. Interesting to have God's backside, which is, I don't know, he's just not afraid of that. Just the kind of the motion of it, God creating, the power of that. Can you feel what he's trying to say about the power of God to create? Then we have, again, it's been so parodied and so iconic that I lose track of the fascination and the beauty of this. So try to take in this picture, right? Now, it's called the creation of Adam, but really that's not what's going on here, is it? If you look at the content, Adam's already been created. He's fully formed, right? So that's not what's happening. How would we describe it? God is touching Adam, giving him a spark, giving him life, spirit, faith. There's something God has, and God says, I'm giving you more than just a body. And Adam has a little will, right? This is he's not completely passive, but it's clear who the actor is. So if you think about our life, does God want to touch us? Are we ready to hold up a limp hand? God, I want the faith that you have for me. Some of the genius in a moment like this, can you feel the tension? It's a 3/4 of an inch separating the two, so they haven't touched yet. God says, I'm reaching out. Right? What is God giving to humanity, giving to each of us that we don't already have? I think is some of the point of this. And Adam there receiving. Now, I can't resist. There are lots of different theories. For example, there was a brain surgeon who said, oh, you know what? This looks a lot like a skull. Is it possible that Michelangelo had done an autopsy on a brain and put God inside a brain? It's sort of interesting. I don't know that that's true, but it is an interesting thing. You see, God has in his left arm there a woman. That's probably Eve. and maybe saying something about Adam and Eve there from the beginning, right? So it's trying not to be sequential, maybe necessarily. And these other kind of figures around God. I just take in that. What does that picture say to you about God's action and human response? How close that is. All right, there, look at that. Wow. Okay, here's Adam and Eve in the garden getting thrown out. Kind of like they do sometimes. It's 2 stories built in one. I'm sorry that the snake has become a woman. Sorry about that, a little misogynist. But there they are, right, Adam and Eve. So he wanted to say something about, the need for Christ because people have strayed from the beginning. And then this is the odd one of Noah. And Noah is also nude. Again, maybe he's saying something about nudity. And it's if you know in the story, once they've landed, Noah gets drunk and is nude, and they see him, and it's embarrassing. And maybe they're mocking him, maybe mocking of Christ. And it's just sort of an odd choice of a scene. But there it is. He's telling biblical stories. The people needed to hear the stories of the Bible. Maybe they were illiterate. Hear this Bible stories. Go look at the ceiling. Okay? There you get a feel for that action and energy, Genesis, creating what God's doing. Okay. So the next one, this is Moses, sculpted for the tomb of a pope, Julius II's tomb. And I like this one too. I don't know if you can notice. Does anyone notice something odd about Moses? He's got what? He's got horns. He's got horns. And this sculpture is known for this. So why does he have horns, right? It doesn't make sense. So in the translation from the Latin to the Hebrew, the word cornata, could be translated horns. So it could be this is a mistranslation, that it was supposed to mean rays of light. When he came down from the mountain with the 10 Commandments, there were rays of light. He was kind of glowing horns. Sigmund Freud, and others said, no, this is anti-Semitic, right? Showing a devil. I wouldn't put it past anti-Semitic society. Maybe both. Maybe both horns from the mistranslation and saying something about Jews being devils? I don't know. The reason I don't feel like it's anti-Semitic is that he seems pretty powerful. He seems beautiful and powerful, and he does not seem like he's a demonic figure. I mean, look at the muscles, right? He's holding the 10 Commandments. He's got this beautiful wise beard. And part of it, when I look at the sculpture too, he almost looks like he's going to stand up. He seems, it's kind of Moses, the Word of God. He does have this kind of energy to him in my book. So, I mean, you could be, Freud thought it, so I don't know, but saying something about this Moses figure and the commandments and who he was in the biblical story. Okay, so take in Moses for just a second. What does he say? Wisdom of the Old Testament. He's supposed to have written the Old Testament, 5 books. The power of Moses. Okay, 25 years after the ceiling was painted on the Sistine Chapel, he was asked to paint, this is behind the altar, right? Like our altar is. Can you see the altar? So this is the high altar in the Sistine Chapel. And he chose the Last Judgment. Kind of not necessarily the oddest choice of a subject, but a lot of controversy. One of the biggest controversy is a lot of nudity. A lot of male nudes and female nudes as the priests are celebrating the Eucharist. So after this was done, and a lot of people were upset and paint over it, blah, blah, blah. There was actually a later artist who was commissioned to paint what they call breeches, pants on a bunch of them. So a bunch of them, are clothed, which seems odd. But so the Last Judgment, think of this scene here. Okay, so here's Jesus, an interesting Jesus. No beard, muscular, right? Super muscular, with a kind of an odd hand gesture, blessing and condemning maybe. It's not an obvious hand gesture, not a typical, and that's Mary next to him. So this is the end time. What's going to happen at the end? Here comes Jesus, a very risque, muscular Jesus, and all these figures. So on the far right, looks like Peter there. Do you see he has a key? Is he saying, I'm giving you the key back? Or he's showing, hey, I got a key, don't send me to hell. Various people kind of showing their wounds or, trying to plead at the Last Judgment. No wings on any of the angels, but trumpets blow, Revelation. This is the end time. This is probably a self-portrait. Right here, you see the broken nose. I don't know if you can see that. St. Bartholomew was flayed. He has his skin taken off, right? And so is he going to make it into heaven? A bunch of people going to hell, so it's a scary scene. A lot of it kind of from Greek mythology, not necessarily Christian, right? With the boat and all of that, or Dante's Inferno. He loved Dante, so there's a lot of that. There was one of the priests who was most critical when they came. He was in the middle of it, and he came in and he said, oh, all that nudity, this is terrible. So what, it was a little petty. You know what Michelangelo did? He painted him as a devil. That's the guy. So he said, okay. And apparently this guy went to the Pope and said, he painted my picture on the wall, Pope. You can't allow that. And the Pope said, I have no oversight on hell, so you're going to have to leave it. That's what he said. But anyway, so a little bit of a fear factor, right? Of people, devils pulling people down. Can you feel the swirl of energy there? So it's a little fear-based, yeah, of, are we going to make it? So there it is. That's when they're voting for the Pope, that's there. And then the Eucharist they do, the Last Judgment theme. Okay, so take that one in. So I have one last one, I think. Okay, he's in his 70s, right? So he's had 50 years of art. And this one isn't as clear of what it is. So it's called typically the Florentine Pietà because it's in Florence. It's sort of a Pietà, right? You can see if Mary is on the right, sort of holding Jesus, and Mary Magdalene on the left. So the key thing is who's the figure at the top, right? Who is this? Who does that look like? Who does it look like? Michelangelo. You see the broken nose? I think it's pretty clear it's a self-portrait. And so what is he saying? Could be Nicodemus, could be Joseph of Arimathea. Who was there at right? Is Jesus coming down from the cross and they're holding him? Are they dragging him to the tomb? It's not clear. But you get a little sense of the Nicodemus Michelangelo figure sort of holding everything together. Holding Mary, holding Jesus. And does Michelangelo feel like he's doing that? The story of Nicodemus in the Gospels, he's kind of a hidden disciple, but at the end he comes out and says, no, I'm a follower at some risk. Is this Michelangelo also saying, me too? I'm a follower of Jesus, and I'm out there, I'm showing the world this Christ figure? Could be. He also, what we know is that he got frustrated. The marble was flawed and it's kind of broken in a couple of places. And apparently he took a hammer and smashed it. on the leg and some of this. It looks sort of awkward, and he wanted it destroyed, but his helpers wouldn't destroy it. And so he was not happy with this, really from artistic point of view. But it does say something about his mindset in his 70s. Okay. There he is. There, holding them up. Holding the suffering of Jesus. Okay. I've shown you the 7. So I am interested in, for you all, and I'm gonna use the microphone here. Take a moment. Which of those works touched you the most and said something to you spiritually, and why? I want to hear from you all. Oh, yeah. You were going to say? Yeah, please.
The first work, I can't remember the name of Madonna.
In the stairs.
Yeah, 15 years old, and I'm thinking, this is, a guy, he's a teenager, and he's trying to get his direction in life.
Yeah.
And it gives me, he's making a decision, actually, there, I'm going to proceed with this. And, at that time, I'm not sure how much other artists, during that time could have explored other avenues, but he decided to take the religious route and the spiritual route.
Yeah, he did.
So to me, that means a lot, for a person growing up, making the right decision, let's say, doing it for the right thing. So.
Beautiful. Yeah, what he's wanting to express. I want to hear. Sarah, which one?
I think the Pietà is the most spiritual for me. It just makes me want to think all of the questions that you asked about, here's a grown Jesus laying across his mother, and what is the meaning of everything, and why is she so big, and it's just very beautiful in a spiritual sense to me. It makes me really want to ponder the meaning of it.
Yeah, and that he's showing the suffering. Martha, you have a favorite?
Well, I first thought about all the nudity, and I thought, was it an attempt to sort of say God is looking at us, not at our worldly goods, or was it a way to take away the class of whoever he's portraying? But I think looking at Mary's face in the Pietà, I thought, was this, did she know what was to come? She's so young, and she's holding him like you would hold a baby, possibly. And was there a kind of a vision of the future?
Right. She's knowing the resurrection's coming. The nakedness, I think you're right. I think it has multiple layers of being naked before God, meaning this is ourselves. There's different theories about his homosexuality. He has poetry about the love of the human male body. Apparently he was, never in any relationship. That was not what he was about. He didn't have time for it or whatever, but definitely the male human figure he was drawn to. Yes. Which one did you like?
I like the Pietà as well, mostly from a spiritual standpoint, but what I like about the Sistine Chapel, and especially the ceiling with the altar, is that it comes full circle. So you have the beginning with it behind the screen, along with the altar of the last day and the last judgment. So you have the Alpha Omega type sense throughout that whole chapel, which I think is religiously very textbook and very clear, but spiritually I like the Pietà better.
But that's a beautiful point of there it is, from Genesis to Revelation in one building, for sure. David, you have one? Which one?
I'll go with the altar in the Sistine Chapel for the same reasons. I like it aesthetically because it's just so goofy.
You're talking about the Last Judgment or the ceiling?
Yeah, the Last Judgment.
The Last Judgment you liked, okay.
Yeah.
What does it speak to you about?
Well, I think for this, in terms of the religiosity of it, like the judgment, conclusion, and so I think it's fun.
It's fun. To me,
It's just it's just so out of the world.
It's out of the world. There's a lot of tension and swirling, and it is kind of, it pulls you in for sure, the craziness. You want to say? Which one do you like?
I think other people have already said this, but the first Pieta, the one with the very large Mary,
Yeah.
I'm still kind of thinking about it, and I don't know why, especially Mary's face.
Mary's face.
It's something that where I guess it's an image that we kind of can understand because it's a mother and child, but then it's also about kind of the mystery of the death on the cross and the resurrection at the same time.
I think absolutely. There's something about that, of how she is. Yeah. Natasha, what?
Yeah, so also the Pietà, because I think that it has a lot of, like it tells a really great story through contrast, that the way that she's so large and so grounded, and how delicate Christ is in her lap. So the very, like, almost like this childlike, like holding of him, but
that
this
beautiful?
like grounded mother. And then the contrast of her looking down, but him looking up, his hands dangling and hers upturned. So I really like just the organization of it. That I think that there's vulnerability that I think he starts to lose over time in his later works, where it has so much of like the strength of the male body, and this one's really delicate. And a lot of his earlier work looks more has the vulnerability, the openness, I think.
I think that's a beautiful, the vulnerability and trying to enter into her moment of suffering, and yet she's kind of serene in it at the same time is a mix. Yeah, let me go to Laura and then John. Yeah.
For me, it's the creation of Adam, and that 3/4 of an inch blank space has got to be one of the most consequential blank spaces in all of art history. And I think the fact that it's not the hands of God and Adam aren't touching implies not only tension, but also a sense that creation is not a finished process, and God is still creating, and creation is an ongoing part of our lives, and we experience that, anew in so many ways. And I like what that implies about our journey with God.
That's beautifully said. Yeah, there's kind of a waiting and a tension, but it's coming, but it's not there yet. It's very,
I really like the end times one, the Revelations.
The Last Judgment.
Yeah.
You and David are on the Last Judgment,
Maybe similar reasons. I love how emphatically petty it is, right?
And petty?
Yeah, I love the notion that, like, your enemies are you depict the people in hell as your enemies, and it's similar to Dante in that respect, right? Like large.
Very Dante, right? Yeah, that's it.
And so, like, the thing that I like in particular, and maybe the spiritual dimension to it, is that, like, his conception of bad things are people who have harmed him or people who think negatively of him, and so, like, it's an imperfect reflection of a spiritual text, or a spiritual text that's informed by a particular person's experiences, which is, in large respects, kind of all of the things that he did, right? The depictions of Christ or of David are Italian men, right? Rather than Middle Eastern men, right? And so it's beautiful. It's also extraordinarily informed by his own particular experiences in his time. And so, like, that's, it's meaningful, right? It's one person's entryway into God and into Christ.
Yeah, beautiful. Annette, I want to hear from you. Well, which one touched you?
I think the Sistine Chapel. However, let's set that aside for a moment. I really liked your comments about the anticipation and also voice, right? Because Jesus,
You mean Adam's lifting
Adam,
up?
sorry,
Yeah.
Yeah, Adam is not touching. He looks like he's kind of leaning back, and so you wonder, is he really gonna reach out and touch, right? And God is not questioning. His finger is straight. Okay, Yeah.
Yeah.
But Adam is more, we don't know.
Yeah,
but,
right.
But I have to say this about the Pieta.
Yeah.
You have those all over Europe. I mean, there's so many copies in so many churches.
Yeah.
And so clearly it was meaningful
Yes, it was.
to a lot of Christians all over.
Yeah.
And I've seen copies of the Pieta everywhere in Portugal and not just Italy, even in Eastern Europe, you know, a lot of the churches. It's profound.
And that we're, again, it's not a biblical scene. It's so that's where you can definitely feel comfortable entering into the symbolic nature of it, right? It is saying something about Mary and her son that's imagined, not historically laying out. Anybody else? Yeah.
I'm going to buck the trend because they all speak to me, but the one that speaks to me the most is David. David's about to do something that's impossible, and yet he manages to do it with God's help. And in order to do that, you have to be willing to accept God's help. And so I thought that Michelangelo captured his perfect vulnerability in that moment as he was accepting.
Yeah, isn't that's some of what we're catching here is he's grabbing moments in time in a salvation story that made a difference. It does make a difference that David hasn't completed his task yet, and he's facing it. And what does that say about human beings? Thank you all. We actually did it. The projector didn't break. Yay! Thank you. This is our last forum for the season. We have other events coming up, but it was great to have your participation. Thank you for everyone who shared, too. Wonderful to share that with you all. There's a little coffee in the back if people want to hang out. And thank you.